Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Shorty September. A very good BookTube event. I'll leave a link to the co-host down below that concentrates for once on small books, short books. The guidelines of Shorty September say fewer than 200 pages. I think we can go lower than that, but 200 pages is a good guideline. Typically speaking, you want a book you can read in a day. And I love this event. I always look forward to the suggestions that come up on different people's videos, and I sometimes get emails from people saying, why would you love this? Aren't you well known for loving larger books? I can love more than one thing. Shorter books have a turbocharge to them, don't they? They have a, you're in and then you're out again. So not only for some of you I know are at least partially concerned about whittling down that TBR, about whittling down the number of books you own that you haven't read, this month is a good time to do that. You can do a Shorty September book every day. No matter how busy you are, you could easily do that. So I thought about that for weeks and thought, well, why not? And why not read a Shorty September book every day in September? And also, why not make them analog? Why not make them physical books? Because that I'm trying to use my physical books or get rid of them. I don't want to keep carrying around so many print and paper books that I don't use because I have an e-reader. So I threw a short book on the pile last night and reread it. It had been years since I read it. And it was a short book by perhaps the king of Shorty September, Edgar Rice Burroughs, who almost never in his whole writing career wrote a book longer than 200 pages, so it's easy to do. This was a story that eventually was published. It was not his title, but it was eventually published as The Oakdale Affair, with this inimitable cover there. I don't want to block the bean, but... and Edgar Rice Burroughs came up with this story in 1917, so over a century ago, as... not really a sequel to his earlier book, The Mucker, but some of the characters would be the same. The setting would be the same. America, not a fantasy world, not Africa. And the sensation, the sensibility of the thing would be the same as well. Just a rollicking, two-fisted adventure story of a type that at the time you could sell to magazines. They were looking for this kind of work. And Edgar Rice Burroughs knew that. He never wrote anything against the market in his whole life. He never did. So he wrote this in 1917, and he sent it to his editor at Munsey's Magazine, which is unknown now. It's long gone. But it was, at the time, a fairly decent, good circulation, well-paying magazine. There are, if you're in Boston area and are interested, starting once the long weekend is over, there are old copies of Munsey's Magazine for $5 a piece selling out in the sale lot of the Brattle Bookshop. So you could actually hold one in your hand and see what it was like. See the market that Edgar Rice Burroughs was going for. He sent it to Munsey's, to his regular editor there, and he had high hopes because he was not nobody at this point. He had already written a couple of books that everybody was reading, that everybody was talking about. He kind of expected that would carry this story. Having read this story again, I can't imagine why, but he did. And it didn't work. His editor said, what on earth? What on earth is this? Actually, the sub-editor who read it first, it takes you an hour to read this thing. It's a tiny little thing. That who did this? Ace brought out as a mass market paperback with a Frank Frazetta cover. Good for them. And that also fixes an odd printing mistake that dogged this thing in its earlier editions, where the last 200 words of the story were summarily removed for no reason, not for censorship or anything. Just this is a whole unmaimed copy of The Oakdale Affair, and the sub-editor, the flunky that the editor at Munsey's, the literary editor at Munsey's, had read this thing first, thought that it was a joke. And the editor then read it. Doesn't take long to do, and I'll be coming back to that. And the editor was bemused and appalled and wrote to Edgar Rice Burroughs and said, not only does Munsey's reject this story, but what on earth are you thinking? Is this a joke? This is preposterous. This story is preposterous. And Edgar Rice Burroughs, like I said, he was not nobody by then. He had some literary authority by then. He was certainly recognized. So it didn't wound him in a way that we know for sure such rejection would have wounded him even a few years earlier. Instead, he took it in his stride, took the story, and submitted it with its crappy title to a different magazine, to Blue Book. And they bought it. They bought it. They bought it for $600. Keep in mind that you might think, Edgar Rice Burroughs, the creator of Tarzan? He sells the story for $600 and he's pleased with that? Keep in mind, that's $2,000 or $3,000. That's not nothing. That's $2,000 or $3,000. And they ran it. They retitled it, of course, to the Oakdale Affair, and they ran it. And it is, well, it's the story of, there are a whole bunch of main characters in this book. Bridge is one of the main characters, and he is a favorite kind of character for Edgar Rice Burroughs. Burroughs actually gives us many, many characters like this. I would argue that his two most famous characters, Tarzan and John Carter of Mars, are both variations on this character, at least linguistically. It was a fad at the time. It was encouraged by a couple of hit movies at the time. For your main character, your leading man, to sound very casual about even the most sincere dangers. To sound very cool is what the word we would use. Very cool and collected. And Bridge is that kind of person. All the way to the end of this book. When you know, he's practically got a noose around his neck. A mob is going to lynch him. And the most he can say is some cool variation of, well, this is kind of depressing. He's not fighting or yelling or anything like that. And he teams up with the Oskaloosa Kid. A wee slim figure who is wanted in a million counties and who is known, a legendary figure in the West at the time. And there is a robbery at the Prim home, the richest man in the territory. His house is robbed of precious jewels by a curiously inept thief. And the robbery happens at the same time that his lovely daughter has gone missing and is presumed dead. Eventually is presumed dead. So there's an uproar as to what's going on, who is the robber, or is it part of a robbing gang? There are a couple of gangs in this book. One of them made up of, it was another fad of fiction at this time, was to talk about, I don't even know what the current term for the homeless is. I know that a few years ago, the fascist academia movement said that we were now to call them the unhoused. Because unhoused means there's a villain. Homeless could be their fault. If they're unhoused, it means someone's refusing them housing. And I don't know if that still holds, or maybe there's something out. People who sleep outdoors, people who sleep rough. I've heard these euphemisms over and over again, and they change all the time depending on which kind of fascist is in charge of language in academia. The word used in this book is hobos. They are hobos, which I know 20 years ago was a word in common parlance. I don't know if it's forbidden anymore. But it did occur unironically in The Simpsons, in a famous episode where there's no flooring in the Simpsons' car, and they everything's falling apart in their home. And Marge Simpson asks, "When did we become poor?" And Bart Simpson says, "I think it was last winter when that cold snap killed off all the hobos." Anyway, there's a huge cast in this book, a huge cast, and Bridge and the Oskaloosa Kid hide out in a mansion, in an ornate and weirdly gothic house that it seems to be haunted by a creature called the Thing that no one ever actually sees, but they do hear it. They hear it shuffling around and dragging a horrible clanking chain. It's all very, very mannered. It's all very artificial. I believe that Muncie's editor specifically isolated the idea of the clanking chain as something that is done ridiculously in this book. And it is. There's quite a bit that's done ridiculously in this book. Quite a bit. And we'll be getting to that. And in the course of their adventures, they encounter a gypsy woman. I don't believe you can call them gypsy women anymore. I think that word has also changed. No idea to what. But her name is Giova, and she has a traveling companion and a pet named Beppo. And you comic book fans will be thinking Beppo must be a monkey, but no, Beppo is not a monkey. In fact, Beppo is pictured on this cover. And there's an enormous, for a little book, this is like an hour-long read. For a little book, there is an enormous amount of hyperventilating prose and convoluted plots. Now, the plots I can't help you with, but I can give you a sample of the convoluted prose. When one of our characters is running in the night, he is terrified, and he is running in the night. For an hour, he continued walking rapidly along the winding country road. He was very tired, but he dared not pause to rest. Always behind him, he expected the sudden onslaught of the bearded, blear-eyed followers of the Sky Pilot. Terror goaded him to supreme physical effort. Recollection of the screaming man sinking to the earthen floor of the hay barn haunted him. He was a murderer. He had slain a fellow man. Yeah, thanks, Edgar. That's generally what it means. He was a murderer. He had slain a fellow man. He winced and shuddered, increasing his gait until he almost ran from the ghost pursuing him through the black night in the greater terror than he felt for the flesh and blood pursuers upon his heels. And nature drew upon her sinister forces to add to the fear which the youth already felt. Black clouds obscured the moon, blotting out the soft kindliness of the greening fields and transforming the budding branches of the trees to menacing and glooming arms which appeared to hover with claw-like talons above the dark and forbidding road. Remember, it's claw-like talons. It's not any other kind of talon. The wind soughed with a gloomy and increasing menace, and sudden light flared across the southern sky, followed by the reverberation of distant thunder. Presently, a great raindrop was blown against the youth's face. The vividness of the lightning had increased. The rumbling of the thunder had grown to the proportions of a titanic bombardment. But he dared not pause to seek shelter. That pitch of prose carries on throughout this book. Carries on throughout 100-plus pages. That pitch of prose barely ever lets up. And that's a good thing, because there's hardly any action in this book. There's one scene, really one scene in the book that has what I would call action, that has a sad ending and involves Beppo. But other than that, this is mostly just people toing and froing. But with that kind of febrile tone to the narrative, you don't really notice. You keep going all the way to the end, when Bridge and the kid are threatened with hanging. And then, with the nooses almost around their neck, you get the big revelation of the book. I am sure, beyond a shadow of doubt, that sub-editor, the first one at McCullers, I almost said that'd be the day, Muncie's, the first one at Muncie's to read this book to the end, I am sure that clerk flung it across the room. I'm positive that he did. And I'm again, his particular editor, it was a wonderful guy, lots and lots of stories to his literary life. I don't know if he ever wrote a memoir. But the editor for Muncie's that read this, I guarantee, threw it across the room. And you know how I know that? Because even though I'd already read this book, when I finished with it last night on the bed in the little book room, I threw it across the room. Literally, I had a physical book in my hand. You don't throw an e-reader across the room. Even I don't throw tech. I don't treat tech that way. But this thing, I hurled it across the room. My sleepy dog woke up and went, "What the hell are you doing?" And then went back to sleep. Because that revelation at the end of this book justifies the decision of Muncie's to pass on this. As ridiculous and silly and headlong and babbling as the rest of this book is, the conclusion is the pinnacle of that. How any grown man could come up with this and think that it was a good twist. Granted, Edgar Rice Burroughs is not all that good at twists, and he always thought he was. I believe he went to his grave thinking he was the master of the last-minute twist. When you can either see it coming a mile away, or the reason you can't see it coming a mile away is because it's so dumb. And yet, none of that matters. That last minute, yes, I got to the twist and I threw it across the room. But that didn't matter, because nothing would have stopped me from getting to that moment. Even though this is incredibly minor Edgar Rice Burroughs. Now, the snobs out there, I don't know that I have any snobs watching, but the snobs out there are going to say that all of Edgar Rice Burroughs is minor. But of course, that's not true, and we won't have to spend much time, honoring the opinions of snobs, but even for a minor Edgar Rice Burroughs book, and this is minor, and so are the other, I think, 4 books of similar length that he wrote in 1917. Even for a minor book, I wouldn't have stopped reading. Because there's something about Edgar Rice Burroughs. I am preaching to the choir with those of you who are his fans. There's something about him. There's something about the way he writes. It's not that if you're a fan, you will excuse his shortcomings and love the way he writes. It's that you become a fan because of the way he writes, and then it's all downhill from there. It's easy sledding from there, and that's true with me. Once I went, an hour later when I got up, I retrieved this there's currently a pile of blankets on the floor of the little book room because I am in the midst of doing a massive amount of laundry. It's pretty much the only thing I can do around here without hurting myself. So I'm in the midst of doing a huge amount of laundry. And when I retrieved the book from the pile of laundry, I realized that. I had calmed down and I realized, well, you kept me going all the way to the end. That's why the twist was so dumb. That's why I threw it across the room. And keep in mind, throwing a book across the room is a reaction. A strong reaction. It's not maybe a good reaction. I doubt that many author wants that, but it's better than just peh. Which so much stuff that I read gives me that reaction. It's just peh. Okay. Well, that was the thing. My eyes went across the page. No, instead, every moment was like the one I read you. Just breathless. Urgent and breathless. Pure pulp writing, in other words. Now, I know that Michael K. Vaughan says that Robert E. Howard is the greatest pulp writer of all time, and I'm not willing to disagree with him. But Edgar Rice Burroughs is right up there. That is surely a stylistic definition of pulp writing, is that everything is charged. You don't ever want to let the reader go. So that's how I started Shorty September. I started Shorty September with the Oakdale Affair, which is, in this Ace edition, this is well short of 200 pages. Yeah, 150 pages. And I mostly read it and loved it. I mostly stuck around. So I'm going to count it as a good start, and we are going to move on. Now, I don't know for sure, but I think that the way I'm going to do Shorty September is all analog books. And I'm going to try to do one a day. It's not much to add to my reading at night to do one of these a day. So I'll try. We'll see. There might be lapses. I'm not a co-host for Shorty September, and I don't know how many of you are even interested in it. But I love it. I love it as a counterpoint to the big books that I read. So I might do one a day. What's the harm in it? You already know I'm a freak, so I might as well keep making videos. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up with thumbs up, and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.